Jonelle Matthews came into the world on February 9, 1972, in Santa Barbara, California, born to her biological mother, Terry Vera Martinez. At that moment, Jonelle's mother was little more than a child herself. She had been only 13 years old when she gave birth to her daughter at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. Although she had initially chosen to continue with the pregnancy, 13-year-old Terry came to understand, after roughly a month of caring for Jonelle, that she was not ready for motherhood. By March of 1972, Terry placed Jonelle up for adoption, hoping to secure for her daughter a better life than she could possibly provide. At that very same time, a couple residing in Greeley, Colorado, named Jim and Gloria Matthews, had been earnestly looking for another child to welcome into their slowly expanding family. Learning of Jonelle's need for an adoptive home, Jim and Gloria decided to take her as their own. Jonelle was embraced by the Matthews family with open arms, becoming the baby sister to her new sibling, Jennifer. And so it seemed the rest was history. The Matthews family was whole. Throughout her childhood, Jonelle was raised to be strong and self-reliant. Some might have labeled her assertiveness as sassy, but anyone who met Jonelle recognized she was among the brightest 12-year-olds you could find. Jonelle always had grand, ambitious plans for her day-to-day life. Indeed, any minor event was a major occasion in Jonelle's view, thanks to her perpetually positive outlook. So in 1984, as the holiday season swept through the Colorado city of Greeley, and Christmas Day neared, 12-year-old Jonelle was as thrilled as ever to spend time with friends and family. Sadly for the Matthews family, evil does not take a holiday break. As was typical for their holiday schedule, the school Jonelle and Jennifer attended, Franklin Middle School, had been preparing for its choir's yearly holiday concert. Jonelle had been looking forward to the concert for months, as she had been selected to perform in it herself. However, in the days leading up to the event, Jonelle had caught a cold. The cold was not severe, though it was an annoyance for a young girl who desperately wanted to spend time with her friends before the winter break. By December 20th, just days before Christmas, Jonelle was practically pleading with her parents to allow her to go to school that day. Unlike most children her age who would try anything to stay home, Jonelle was determined to attend. Jonelle assured her parents she was feeling fine and that she would take it easy during the day. She told them she had gifts to give to friends she wouldn't see for weeks over the break. Not to mention she had been anticipating the holiday concert for weeks and did not want to miss it for anything. So Jim and Gloria agreed Jonelle could go to school and the concert on one condition. She had to come directly home after the choir's performance to rest. Unfortunately, neither of Jonelle's parents would actually be able to attend the performance that evening. Her father Jim had promised Jonelle's older sister, Jennifer, that he would watch her basketball game that night while Jonelle's mother, Gloria, needed to travel out of town for a few days after learning her own mother had fallen ill across the country. Despite lacking her family in the audience that night, Jonelle was nonetheless overjoyed to be part of her school's modest production. She even managed to meet up with a friend, Deanna Ross, at the start of the event, securing a ride home with Deanna's father, Russell. The concert was everything Jonelle had hoped it would be. During the drive home in Russell's car, Jonelle and Deanna chatted about the event, their day, and their respective Christmas plans. It was the perfect end to a wonderful day in Jonelle's eyes. Tragically, Jonelle's night was far from over. As Russell pulled his car up to the curb outside Jonelle's home around 8:15 p.m., the two girls said their goodbyes and wished each other a Merry Christmas. Jonelle exited the car and walked up the driveway to the front door. Russell and Deanna waited patiently in their car outside, watching to ensure Jonelle made it inside without issue. Once inside, Jonelle flashed the lights in the foyer to signal she was safely home. With that, Russell and Deanna drove off toward their own house. Little did they know they would be the last people ever to see Jonelle alive. At approximately 8:30 p.m., records indicate Jonelle answered a call to the Matthews home phone, even taking a message for her father. As the caller had been trying to reach Jim, Jonelle's father was the principal of a nearby elementary school called Platte Valley Elementary, and one of the teachers had been attempting to contact him to say he would not be at work the next morning. That was the final time anyone ever heard from Jonelle. Well, with the exception of one other individual, the sinister figure lurking in the shadows. After finishing the call, Jonelle reportedly made herself comfortable in the living room. She had a particular spot on the couch that practically had her name engraved on it. She was known to sit on her side of the sofa next to the family's lavish Christmas tree, relaxing by the warmth of a space heater. With Christmas merely days away, that mental picture of a tired Jonelle curled up on the couch with her shawl draped over her shoulders was the essence of the holiday season. Regrettably, the evening's calm was brief. At about 9:30 p.m., just an hour after Jonelle had been dropped off, Jim arrived home to an empty house. An empty house was not necessarily unusual. He initially assumed Jonelle had simply stayed out a bit later with friends, despite the agreement she had made with both parents that morning. Then Jim entered the living room. On the couch, Jim noticed three very specific things. First, the heater was on with no one there to enjoy its warmth. Second, Jonelle's favorite shawl was tossed across the back of the couch as if she had just removed it moments before. And lastly, a pair of Jonelle's shoes were positioned neatly in front of her usual spot on the couch, as if kicked off the instant she sat down. The only thing missing from the idyllic scene in the living room was Jonelle herself. Jim tried to stay calm as he swiftly searched the house for his youngest daughter. Finding no other trace of Jonelle, Jim heard the front door open and hurried downstairs. Reaching the foot of the stairs, he let out a sigh as he saw Jennifer, who had returned home around 10 o'clock. Jennifer was completely unaware of her father's sudden alarm. When she told him she had not seen Jonelle all evening, he knew immediately something was terribly wrong. Almost at once, Jim called the police and reported his daughter missing. Greeley police arrived at the Matthews residence at 320 43rd Avenue Court within 15 minutes of Jim's initial call. The possibility of a missing child in the winter chill warranted a rapid response. As officers inspected the interior and exterior of the home, they were amazed to find virtually no evidence of a struggle or any sign of forced entry. At first, authorities believed Jonelle must have left on her own, even though she appeared to have left the house without even shoes or a jacket on a cold night. Jim assured the police his 12-year-old daughter could not have gone far if she was barefoot in the snow. Then, upon closer examination of the home's exterior, officers found something odd. Footprints in the snow near the living room windows. Footprints too large to belong to a young girl, seemingly indicating someone had been watching Jonelle from outside. Despite the eerie nature of the footprints, police continued with their initial theory that Jonelle had potentially run away. The authorities involved eventually released a summary of her disappearance. On the evening of December 20, 1984, 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews was dropped off at her parents' home by her friend's family at approximately 8:30 p.m. When her parents returned home later that night, they discovered Jonelle was missing. She was last seen wearing a red blouse, dark gray sweater vest, charcoal gray skirt, light blue ski jacket, and house slippers. Jim again tried to convince police there was almost no chance Jonelle would have run away. Jim stated, "There were too many neat things happening to her. She had a girlfriend coming to sleep over the day after she disappeared. She was going to be in the Christmas presentation at church. She's such a ham, plus with Christmas." Though police acknowledged Jim's statements, they proceeded to investigate Jonelle's disappearance from the angle of a runaway. They examined Jonelle's locker and bedroom, hoping to find evidence of a plan to leave. To no surprise of Jim and Gloria, police found nothing out of the ordinary. The investigators' runaway theory was further undermined when Jonelle still had not returned home in the days following her disappearance. In most runaway cases, the child usually comes back within a few days of leaving. As police shifted focus to consider the possibility Jonelle had actually been kidnapped from her home, there was only one real person of interest they had in mind: Jonelle's birth mother, Terry Vera Martinez. It is not entirely unusual for biological parents to reach out to their children long after giving them up for adoption. So for weeks, investigators monitored Terry's movements, hoping to find some sign she had been involved in Jonelle's disappearance. All the while, her family panicked and feared something terrible had happened to their daughter. Though the police's initial assumption of Terry's involvement was understandable, it was extremely distant and unsubstantiated. In fact, Terry had not even known her biological daughter was missing. More than that, she never actually made contact with Jonelle. Even with their most promising person of interest found completely innocent, police certainly took their time investigating other potential leads. They interviewed friends, family, neighbors, teachers, and essentially anyone who had been near the Matthews residence on the night of December 20th, 1984. Sadly, every lead investigators had eventually turned into a dead end, and Jonelle's case was not the only one on the nation's mind. During the 1970s and 1980s, more than 1 million children went missing in the United States every single year. 1 month after Jonelle vanished, the news station KMGH reported on a 24-hour prayer vigil for Jonelle's safe return held at the Greeley church the Matthews attended. 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews disappeared from her Greeley home 1 month ago today. It's believed she's the victim of a kidnapping. She has not been seen or heard from since December 20th. Authorities and the girl's parents still have many avenues open to them in their search, but the Matthews family feels their widest avenue is prayer. We want to pray for Jonelle. We wanted to pray for the family, that God can do the right things, that His timing will be precise. A 24-hour prayer vigil began at noon today at most Greeley churches. The Matthews family, Jim, Gloria, and 16-year-old Jennifer, attend the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. Throughout the ordeal, their faith has been strong and unwavering. Meanwhile, Jim Matthews says he and his family will keep hanging on to the hope that Jonelle is alive and will one day be found. We'll keep hanging on, he says, and will not give up. Months passed since Jonelle disappeared. And in March 1985, President Ronald Reagan decided it was time to speak out regarding the startling disappearances of children across the country. Understanding the importance of the media, President Reagan pleaded with journalists nationwide to help aid investigators in locating missing children and bringing them home. During his speech, President Reagan even mentioned Jonelle by name, stating, "Well over 1 million American children disappear from their homes or neighborhoods every year, causing, as we can all understand, heartbreaking anguish. For example, I learned about Jonelle Matthews of Greeley, Colorado, who would have celebrated a happy 13th birthday with her family just last month. But 5 days before Christmas, Jonelle disappeared from her home. Despite the efforts of the president and the media alike, Jonelle's case went cold. There was a potential piece of evidence found in May 1985, when a portion of a person's scalp was discovered on a farmer's land in Weld County. However, upon further investigation, the skin and hair attached to the scalp did not match Jonelle's. After confirming the remains did not belong to her daughter, Gloria stated, "I wasn't really prepared emotionally to look at the scalp, but it was a job that had to be done. I felt a great sense of relief when I realized it wasn't Jonelle." And despite the Matthews' initial relief, it was clear the investigation was once again stalled without any further leads, and it would remain that way for a very long time. 10 years passed with no leads, no indication Jonelle was still alive, and no hope of locating her anytime soon. Nearly a decade after Jonelle first vanished, Jim and Gloria finally had their daughter declared legally deceased. Despite the finality of declaring their daughter dead, Jim and Gloria longed for proper closure. They simply wanted to understand what had happened to their bright little girl, whose smile lit up any room she entered. At the time, it seemed the Matthews would never get answers to the heartbreaking questions they had held since 1984. Staying in Greeley proved far too painful for the Matthews family to endure over the years. Jim and Gloria eventually retired to Costa Rica, and Jennifer moved to Washington. And then, in July 2019, nearly 35 years after Jonelle disappeared without a trace, the entire case broke wide open. As construction workers prepared land in a rural area on Greeley, Colorado's southeastern side for an oil and gas pipeline dig, they stumbled upon something peculiar. The team had been slowly moving earth around 4:50 p.m. on Tuesday, July 23rd, just 15 miles southeast of Jonelle's old home, when they shockingly uncovered a set of human remains. Upon further investigation and DNA testing, the buried remains were identified as those of 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews, the girl whose disappearance had turned the town of Greeley upside down all those years before. Not only did the discovery of Jonelle's remains allow the Matthews family to come to terms with their daughter's disappearance, but it also allowed investigators to determine Jonelle's cause of death. You see, despite the fact her body had obviously decomposed in the 30 years since it had been buried, there was a very clear bullet hole in what remained of her skull. As the investigation finally began anew, Jonelle's parents returned to Greeley to put their daughter to rest in her hometown. For them, uncovering Jonelle's remains meant their daughter had been dead the entirety of the 35 years they had endlessly hoped to eventually bring her home. Despite this discovery, it did not provide them with any answers as to what actually happened to Jonelle just days before Christmas in 1984. On September 13, 2019, investigators from the Greeley Police Department publicly announced they had a person of interest in Jonelle's abduction and subsequent murder. In fact, the suspect was none other than a man they had secretly had their eye on the entire time, Steve Pankey. Steve Pankey was not an average former Greeley resident. Rather, he was well known and influential. He had actually run for governor in Idaho in 2014 and 2018, and even ran for lieutenant governor in 2010. You might wonder what a politician has to do with a 3-decade-old cold case? The answer is sure to shock you. Pankey was first associated with the land where Jonelle's remains were found, though he later denied any connection and instead claimed police began investigating him out of dislike. He said, "I don't think they have a really good suspect, and I'm somebody they don't like, so I think that's it." His home in Twin Falls was searched under a warrant on behalf of Greeley PD's assumption he was directly responsible for the abduction and murder of Jonelle Matthews. At the time of Jonelle's initial kidnapping, Steve Pankey and his now ex-wife had lived just about 2 miles away from the Matthews home. After the police search of his house, Pankey said, 31 days ago they searched my house. Took a whole bunch of stuff and I'm still at home, so obviously in all my stuff, they found nothing connecting me to it, it being Jonelle's murder. Pankey even voluntarily agreed to give a DNA sample to police, a choice that may prove critical later. At the time of Jonelle's disappearance, Pankey had served as a youth pastor at the very same church the Matthews family attended weekly. Upon further investigation, Steve Pankey claimed to have never even known the Matthews family. Rather, he asserted he had only ever heard of them as a result of Jonelle's case. Number 1, it wasn't until my wife and I and our 5-year-old returned from Colorado, or from California to Colorado on December 26th. That was my first night. My first on that night, and the car radio is the first time I heard that Jonelle Matthews existed or disappeared. That was my first knowledge of that. Yet in an interview with the Colorado Sun, Pankey contradicts his story by acknowledging he had in fact been a youth pastor at the church. Shockingly, he also includes the information that he had been accused of assault by the piano player at the church. Not only did he know Jonelle and her family personally, but he had also made efforts to speak with detectives following her initial disappearance. According to police, Steve Pankey initially inserted himself into the investigation many times over the years, even claiming to have potential knowledge of the crime that could help officers. However, he refused to give investigators any information unless they granted him immunity beforehand. Back when the case first began, Steve Pankey had discussed some details with police, accidentally mentioning that the footprints remaining in the snow outside the Matthews home had been covered up using a rake. That small piece of information had never actually been released to the public, causing police to have their initial suspicions regarding Pankey's potential role in Jonelle's disappearance. Yet beyond that, they had no probable cause to investigate him at the time. According to police, Pankey claimed to have watched students walk home from Franklin Middle School almost every day, the same school Jonelle and her sister attended around the time of her disappearance. Yet Pankey declared that he and his wife had been at home on the night of Jonelle's disappearance, as they had been planning on heading out of town the next day for a trip to Big Bear Lake in California. However, upon receiving false statements and superfluous details regarding the trip itself, police decided to interview Pankey's now ex-wife, Angela Hicks. Angela told police she and Steve had actually started their trip on December 22nd, 1984, not the 21st. More than that, Angela said the trip was not planned. It was entirely unexpected. When the couple returned to Greeley the day after Christmas, Angela said her then-husband had taken an unusual interest in Jonelle's case, even forcing her to read newspaper articles concerning the case. And then Steve even started digging in the yard of their shared home for a reason he never revealed to Angela. Later that same week, a vehicle stored on their property mysteriously caught fire and burned to a crisp. In 2008, Steve Pankey's own son was murdered unexpectedly. Angela recalled that at their son's funeral, Steve stated, "I hope God didn't allow this to happen because of Jonelle Matthews." At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, as she assumed Steve was grieving and at a loss for comprehensive words. Pankey later addresses this accusation in a statement. Another interesting layer to this whole case, Gretchen, is that when police searched his home, Pankey told me that they took a DVD from him, and on that DVD was actually his son's funeral from 2008. Now I asked him why detectives would not take this, and Pankey said that he heard the detectives think that on that DVD is a recording of him saying that he hopes this did happen to his son because of what happened to Jonelle Matthews. Pankey said that that thought has never crossed his mind and that he never said those words ever. Despite being ultimately unhelpful with the police search when Jonelle first went missing, after his name was again associated with the disappearance, Pankey was not afraid to speak liberally with journalists or news outlets. In fact, he gave many inflammatory interviews with reporters as the investigation began to see him as a primary suspect. Pankey eventually gave a 51-minute incendiary interview to KTVB. He speaks casually and with flat effect through the entire interview, and his manner, one arm cast leisurely over the back of a bench, appears far too unfeeling for a man suspected of the horrific murder of a child. When speaking of the night Jonelle went missing, he reveals he has, as he puts it, a gay background. I have a gay background. It's all over the internet. It's well known. And I had had multiple problems with local law enforcement. And so I was thinking, oh no, here's coming another arbitrary charge. So they flashed their lights towards my house and towards the house next to me. And then they just turned around and left. So I thought nothing more about it. We went to bed. As pointed out by keen observers in the video comments, Pankey seems to mention his homosexual background frequently in the interview as a way to dismiss any belief he would have an interest in young girls like Jonelle. I got a copy of the newspaper, and the Jonelle Matthews thing was all over it. It was the only murder in the area that was at that time, or disappearance at that time, that was talked about. So, Pankey appears to stumble over his words here, catching himself referring to the case as a murder when, at the time and for 35 years, no one had known she was murdered. Some viewers have seen this slip-up as an admission of guilt, and perhaps it is, as only the murderer would have known Jonelle was not simply missing. However, it could be explained that Pankey was filling in information retroactively. To explain his involvement in the case, Pankey explains that his father-in-law told him that when he worked as a groundskeeper at the local cemetery, he had a cop tell him he had a body that needed to be buried in a casket and that it would look bad for Steve. What I did is the very next week when my attorney got back, I called him and I said I don't know if this has anything to do with the Jonelle Matthews case or not, but I may have some information and I don't know what to do. And he said that he would be concerned about obstruction of justice, and he didn't go into any detail after that. And I owed him a lot of money, and his voice was like, not real friendly about this, so I thanked him. I got off the phone. I then called the Fort Collins, because I had a bad relationship with the Greeley Police Department. I called the Fort Collins FBI. The FBI, I talked to an agent named Lyons, a special agent Lyons, and he said he'd call me back the next day and tell me where we'd meet. Well, what I told Lyons on the phone is I wanted to avoid an obstruction of justice charge. I just don't want to have a problem. And so the next day he called me back and he wanted me to meet him at the Greeley Police Department. So I met him there. What I told him is somebody had talked. I said, I had talked to my attorney, and if you get rough with me, I gonna low you up, and that'll be the end of it. But I said I talked to my attorney. Somebody had talked to me about a body. They never mentioned the name Jonelle Matthews. They never mentioned any name, but I thought the conversation was weird, and I don't totally trust the person that said it. Throughout the interview, Pankey had suspiciously long pauses where he seems to forget the next piece of his story. He claims that a cop is involved with Jonelle's disappearance and frequently references this theory. Pankey claims this story about his father-in-law is the total of his knowledge about Jonelle's disappearance. So I was thinking this is the end of it. There'll be no more. Pankey has even taken to social media to air his grievances with the Greeley Police Department and his claims that police have tried to frame him for the young girl's murder. When asked why he wants Jonelle's case to be resolved, Pankey's answer appears to have a distinctly frustrated tone. And then can you tell me why you want it to be resolved? So it's resolved. So it's over with. So that family has the same closure that I have, okay? And also, I mean, talk about, wouldn't you like it resolved to maybe have your name cleared or... Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Without a doubt. Following his rather chaotic interview with KTVB, Pankey sent a statement to KTVB to clear some allegations that had arisen from his initial interview and to, quote, make a more concise overview of the entire case as I saw it from my perspective. In the statement, he went on to actually name people he believed could be persons of interest for police. He includes Russ Ross, the father of Jonelle's friend who had driven her home the night she vanished, Greeley Mayor John Gates, GPD Chief Mark Jones, and he even names himself as a suspect. And in his new statement on Saturday, he said he believes police are manipulating evidence to make him look guilty. One example he lists is that the probable cause affidavit for police to search his Twin Falls home. It states that I am associated with that property that she was found on where they redoing the gas drilling. I mean, that's a blatant lie. Pankey appears to refer to himself as a victim in the investigation. Many people in the comments have pointed out how consistently insincere he sounds when referring to Jonelle. Probably most people don't realize in the 300,000 or how many missing, exploited children there are across the United States. There are a lot of people that are victims in it. It goes, the rock in the pond has many rings. It just keeps going out. There's a lot here. I'm not against them solving it, okay? I'm for solving it. On October 13th, 2020, Steve Pankey was indicted on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping in Jonelle's disappearance and subsequent death. As of November 2020, 69-year-old Steve Pankey is being held without bail in the Ada County Jail in Idaho, awaiting his eventual extradition to Colorado for trial. Upon Pankey's potential association with the case becoming public knowledge, a variety of true crime podcasts realized Steve is a Patreon patron of theirs. Chillingly, Pankey was even discovered to have been a Patreon of the popular podcast, The Trail Went Cold, one of the first and only podcasts to cover the Jonelle Matthews case. Perhaps Steve Pankey's eerie obsession with Jonelle Hess' case is an indication of something far darker than his claimed status as an average true crime lover. It will be interesting to see what happens through the course of Steve Pankey's trial, as he is the first proper person of interest in the Jonelle Matthews case in the last 36 years. We don't yet know what happened that cold winter night, but soon we may finally find out. Perhaps the most positive thing to take away from Jonelle's story is this: she and her family may finally receive closure, finally knowing what happened to the unsuspecting 12-year-old girl who was brutally murdered all those years before.